Hey, this is Lane from LainTCG, and I'm here to talk about the health of the format for March 2025 and why it's better than you think, even before the ban list. So we're going to get into it. But basically, why am I making this video? Prior to the reveal of the ban list, there was a lot of doomer discussion about Digimon and the state of the card game. Enough so that there was a trending topic in Reddit for a few days about how people were tired of hearing those sorts of takes, and frankly, I agree with that. I don't like hearing them myself either. But even in those comments, people were fairly down on the state of the game at the moment, and I frankly don't agree on the assessment of where the game is at. And I wanted to make a video about why I think that. But basically, what I've not seen addressed in this situation with people worrying that Digimon is dying because we're not getting ban lists fast enough, or XYZ deck is so powerful it makes everything else irrelevant, is that as far as the competitive scenes for card games go, Digimon is probably one of the healthiest out there, even before the ban list came down. We do have issues, especially in our casual formats, which I'm going to talk about a bit later. But I think this is probably the healthiest card game out there as far as the competitive scene goes that I am actively observing, basically. And I believe that a lot of competitive Digimon players don't compete in other card games, or if they do, they're not comparing card games accurately or with data, and observe their competitive scenes like I observe other competitive scenes. So I thought that it would be a good idea to share some perspective on how good we actually have it compared to the other games, so that you're aware and so that you can maybe, have a little bit of perspective when you're thinking about these things going forward. So let's get in with the rest of that. So what do I mean by healthy? Basically, I personally believe a healthy competitive format for a card game is one that is diverse in options that you can play and get to top representation. You're not necessarily going to be winning, but getting top 32 or 16 or 8, depending on the event, those sorts of things. So being able to do that with a wide array of different decks, different tier 1 and tier 1.5 decks that can do that, maybe some tier 2 decks. Diverse mostly just represents how many decks are viable enough to get there in tier 1, 1.5, 2, or potentially beyond, that can actually achieve some level of representation in the meta. Do you regularly see only tier 1 decks top? Or do you see your tier 1.5 decks or rogue style tier 2 decks top occasionally, even if they don't win? Those things are factors that you should keep in mind when you're thinking about these sorts of things. Do you have a handful of decks that are maybe not the best decks out there, but you consistently see placing highly? These things matter as far as diversity for the format goes. And then you have representation, which is primarily how weighted the top decks are in top representation. We have not yet had a tier 0 format in Digimon. I am going to explain basically what a tier 0 format is, because it is a YuGiOh term, specifically because of how their card game is set up. But tier 0 formats is a term from YuGiOh, our most easily comparable card game other than One Piece. I will be talking about both of them later, in which a deck has 60 to 65% representation or more, frequently more, in the competitive metagame. Our spreads are fairly decent. Even when you have 1 or 2 decks that are dominating the format, there are still tier 1.5 decks that are regularly represented in top cuts at a decent rate. And I don't believe that we've had a format so far, correct me if I'm wrong, where there is a deck that you see 65% of the time or more in top cuts for Digimon. That is just not a thing that we encounter. So, I'm going to get into top cut representation in Digimon, specifically for Worlds from Saturday. I'm also going to be talking about 2.0, like Special Booster 2.0, shortly after this, so that you have a data comparison point, because I wanted to get a handful of tournaments at the end of the format so that you're aware. It's maybe not necessarily representative of how March has gone in particular, but it will be representative of the game in the state up to Worlds, more or less. So the graph to the right, or the one above me, is the one for Worlds from Saturday, the 15th of March, 2025. We don't have hard data on what people were playing on day one outside of the top cut, but within the top cut, we have hard numbers. So for the top 24 players, we had 5 blue-green Imperial, 4 purple hybrid, 2 Sakuyamon, 2 Tyrant Kawagamon, which was surprising to me, 2 Leviamon, 2 Magnamon X, 2 Imperial Dramon Virus, 1 Gallantmon X, 1 Dog Base Mirage, 1 Fenrilugamon OTK, 1 Galaxy Toolbox, and 1 Royal Knight deck. Right, so you see that we have a fairly wide spread on this at, what, 12 different decks? Out of 24 players, we have 12 different decks, which is kind of absurd as far as this thing goes. You do not see that kind of representation in other card games, generally. But also, we have the numbers breakdown. So, the most highly represented deck was Blue-Green Imperial, with 20.8% of the top cut player base, followed by Purple Hybrid at 16.7% representation in the player base in the top cut. The decks that won specifically were Galaxy Toolbox with first. There was only one played at 4.1% representation, and I am calling it specifically Galaxy Toolbox because after looking at the list, there is only one Mirage. It is not a Mirage deck that's using Galaxy base. It is a Galaxy base that is doing a handful of things in level 6. You also have second with Blue-Green Imperial at 20.8% representation, and then you have third with Sakuyamon. Only 2 were played, so it only has 8.3% representation in the top cut. And then you have fourth with Virus Imperial, which again, only 2 were played at 8.3% representation, which is pretty decent numbers. The deck that is the most commonly played did not even win. They got second, which is, pretty good and what you would expect for something that has the most representation, but not quite what you'd think. The spread is pretty wide, and even though Purple Hybrid was one of the most represented decks at 16.7%, it didn't make the top 4. There's also 12 different deck archetypes represented, and there's even representation from Tyrant and Magnamon, which are decks that haven't seen the top of the meta in a good bit of time. Magnamon has some representation. I will get into that with the 2.0 stuff that I'm going to be going into in a minute, but it is not seeing the top as frequently as it was, and everybody was fairly doom and gloom about that card when it first came out. With good reason. There was limits and bans related to it. But also, it's still doing okay, and it's putting up performance now, and you're seeing a lot of old decks that are still kind of performing fairly well, which is nice. It's nice to see. So, yeah, we're going to get into the rest now. So, the last 6 tournaments of Special Booster 2.0. This is going to be data over 6 different tournaments that took place at the top level of Ultimate Cups and the region finals during the 2.0 format. All this information is from Eggman Events. If you'd like to go check it out, it will be over there. I am also going to show a Excel spreadsheet that I did of it, and a more specific pie chart for the 6 tournaments total. We have one outlier where Purple Hybrid is a tier 0 deck, but it is misrepresented most likely because it is the only tournament that we have that we only have the top 8 from instead of top 16, which is something that you should keep in mind with this sort of thing. It is skewed incorrectly. But out of 88 participants over 6 different tournaments, only 3 decks won. So we have Purple Hybrid with 26.14% of participation of overall decks and 4 wins. And then you have Fenrilugamon OTK with 4.55% of participation and 1 win. And then Pyramidimon with 4.55% of participation and 1 win. So across 6 tournaments, there were 88 participants, and we have 20 different decks represented, which is, again, kind of nuts for card games. Only 7 of which were only played one time, so 13 of them were played multiple different times. Which is, again, a thing that points to the format being fairly healthy, or was even before the ban list. So, we're going to get into the numbers. If you'd like to pause to look at anything, please do. The numbers are fairly straightforward, and the pointer thing that I have is only really covering up things that have the exact same. So, specifically, these are the results from the Carta Magica Ultimate Cup, the PEC Acatuania Ultimate Cup, Pro Play Games Ultimate Cup, No Heroes Ultimate Cup, the Latin America 2024 Finals, and the Oceania 2024 Finals. So we see that Purple Hybrid, out of 88, total participants, is represented 23 times, Imperial with 10, Magnamon X with 9, Gallantmon X with 8, and then we have Mirage with 8, Fenriluga OTK with 4, and Pyramidimon with 4. Past that, it starts to drop more and more with 3. There's 4 on Dominimon Great Angels, 2 Red Hybrid, 2 Dynamon Tyranno, 2 Rapidex, 2 Demon Lords, 1 Lucimon X, 1 Lord Nightmon, because it dropped off at this point, 1 Leviamon X, 1 Phoenixmon X, 1 Tyrant, 1 Numemon, and 1 Bloomlord. The percentages are next to the totals column if you'd like to see, but specifically you have Purple Hybrid with 26%, Imperial with 11, and then you have 10% in descending from Magnamon down. But yeah, it shows that we have a fairly wide spread of decks. There are 20 different decks, and again, only 7 of them were played one time. So you have decent representation of different decks. Granted, Purple Hybrid is more represented than everything else, but Purple Hybrid also got hit for a reason. Imperial is the next best thing, but even from there, we have decent representation for other stuff. So, we're doing decent. Also, if you want a visual representation, sorry for the flashbang with the huge white background, but here is a pie chart. So we see that Purple Hybrid is only like a little bit more than 25%, and everything else is still represented fairly well. You see decent wedges of everything, and you don't see that the top deck is, making anywhere over like 35% to like 65% of the format. That's just not the case in Digimon. Granted, Purple Hybrid is, again, vastly overrepresented at the end of 2.0 compared to everything else, but it's still pretty great that we have such a wide spread and so many different decks that are playable at the top end. And also, it's doing okay. We're doing okay. But the thing that I want to go into most for background for people who don't play or look at other card games is a comparison of Digimon to other card games and how starkly different it is. So, I'm going to be comparing us against 2 other card games primarily with recent finishes for both, because of their similarity to a few aspects of our card game, but also, honestly, they're the ones I have some interest in checking on. I would have included Magic as well, but Magic also has a fairly diverse format. Granted, it's much, much more expensive than our format, but still, their format is fairly diverse, and I just wanted to point out how much worse off we could be, basically. So, YuGiOh is going to be the one that I go into first. They're similar to Digimon in deck building, primarily. While the resource system is based off of card advantage in hand, instead of mana or a memory system, they primarily build decks around archetypes with many engines to help power their combos, which aligns them fairly closely with Digimon, at least in deck building sense. And then we have One Piece, which is the second. It's the most similar to our system aside from the resource system specifics, with effects and resources, so it makes sense to compare it, as it's also run by Bandai and has a lot of the same things going on with it, and I'm going to be getting into that second. So, YuGiOh's format. YuGiOh is an eternal format similar to Digimon, where every card since the start of the game is available to build with, aside from things that are located on their banned or limited list. The game is 25 years old at this point, so it has led to some substantial power creep over time, with most games ending in 2 turn cycles and being decided generally on the first turn cycle. You either win when you open, or you break your opponent's board when you open, and then the game is settled on the second turn cycle, more or less most of the time. Yu-Gi-Oh!, similar to Digimon, breaks their cards up into archetypes primarily based on names in their card game system rather than keywords like we use, and promotes creating decks within those archetypes and using sub-engines to power their combos. This isn't exactly like stuff like Galaxy Base or Dog Engine in Digimon, in that the sub-engine in Yu-Gi-Oh! Can be most of what makes the deck go before landing on end monsters related to the archetype or generic board breaker / omni-negate kind of monsters like Baron de Fleur or other things that just say no to your opponent. That's about it. I'm going to be showing information from 2 of Yu-Gi-Oh's YCSs that happened recently, which is their competitive series of events. But due to there being special events, these YCSs are 3v3s as opposed to their normal 1v1 format. Though the 1v1 format has similar results. I should say that there is one 1v1 tournament that happened recently where the skew is fairly different, but it's still a 33% or higher dominated top of the format, and then after that it starts to fall off a little bit. But yeah. So Team YCS Las Vegas. You can see how big that cut of the pie chart is for YuGiOh, which is the top deck of the format currently. Team YCS Las Vegas happened last weekend on the 15th of March, same time that our Worlds happened, and had a total of 1,416 participants, each making up teams of 3. The event was won by Team Legionnaire. Each player on that team is running YuGiOh, which is their top tier deck of the format. I'm not quite sure if it is a tier 0 deck at this point, but it is close enough that you can potentially call it one. But each of them is running YuGiOh, and one of which was running a small Fiendsmith engine. Fiendsmith is basically a combo engine that runs off of a few different cards and can combo for like 15 or 20 minutes before you get into your end board. Of the 48 participants, 32 were on YuGiOh as a deck, which makes it tier 0 for this one tournament at 66.67% representation. And the next highest was Malice at 6, making it have only 12.5% representation in the tournament. It is a stark difference between the two. Malice is also a good deck, but YuGiOh is doing a lot right now. A lot. So you're seeing it much more than literally anything else at the moment. Data from the Team YCSs can be a bit skewed due to the team dynamic, but it is not abnormal to see top decks have 33 to 55% representation in the meta in Yu-Gi-Oh! At any given time. YuGiOh is no exception to this. It is anywhere from 33 to like 65% of a YCS or large tournament when you're looking at the results for these. And then we have Team YCS San Salvador, which Team YCS San Salvador took place on the 1st of March and had 324 participants. Team Look Pack at Him won the whole thing with 2 Mermail decks and 1 YuGiOh deck. It is abnormal to see Mermail decks anymore, but they piloted them to victory. Regardless, there was also a YuGiOh deck on the team, and even though the winners only had 1 YuGiOh deck, it should say, instead of 2, being the most powerful and popular deck in the format, it still makes up 26 of the top 48 decks, making it 54.16% of the whole playing field, with the next highest, Malice, making up 11. Even though Mermail was 2 of the winning decks, those were the only 2 in the whole top cut. I'm not sure what they did that made it top. Regardless, congrats to them on getting it with a like underrepresented deck. While it's not this event historically, there's also been formats like Shizu Tearlaments from YCS Pasadena, where Tearlaments, the best deck at the time, was 26 out of the top 32 decks, making it 81.25% of the playfield. There are some wild ass imbalances in the top cuts on Yu-Gi-Oh! and it is not abnormal for this to be the case with some other card games as well, but we could have this sort of thing going on. So, One Piece. At the moment, One Piece is an eternal format, though that will be changing soon as far as I'm aware, potentially because of the deck that I'm going to be talking about in a minute. So at the moment, anything can be played going back to the start of the game. One Piece has Dawn as their resource system, which goes up to 10, allowing them to spend for cost to play units or events, which are basically options, as well as for abilities, up to 10 a turn by the end of the game, as well as having the same life system as Digimon, where they get more or less depending on their leader. Like Commander and Magic the Gathering, you have a leader, though in One Piece they are always on the board, and are what you base your deck around. Frequently with a specific archetype they focus on, but not always. Sometimes they just serve more of a functional role, and you're not, rolling for, like, the Straw Hat crew or whatever, right? Games typically end shortly after turn cycle 5 when they reach 10 Dawn to play with, but it can go shorter or longer depending on the matchup, whether they have a rush deck or a stall deck, those sorts of things. So, these are some graphs for One Piece events. In the last 6 events recorded on Eggman events, Doflamingo from OP01, the first ever set in One Piece, has been by far the most represented deck in the format. The deck primarily works by playing cards off the top of your deck for a highly reduced cost, suspended, so turned sideways, though they call it rested. I know we do too, but suspending is what we normally call it in Digimon, and uses cheap utility units to stack the top of your deck to guarantee you hit something that's worth it. Out of the last 6 events, the smallest representation Doflamingo had in Top Cut was 25%. Currently, OP1 Doflamingo has 87 topping decks out of 208 across these 6 events, giving him 41.83% of the top playing field, with 4 of the 6 wins. The next closest deck, which is extremely lower, is their starter deck 13 Luffy, with only 34 tops in comparison to 87, and 16.35% of the playing field, with 2 of the 6 wins. So these 2 decks make up every win, and one has almost 42% of the whole playing field, and the other has 16. It's not quite a tier 0 format, but Doflamingo is by far the best thing to be playing right now, and if they do move to set rotation, he will be immediately unable to be played. So yeah, it's possible that they're moving to set rotation because of this with One Piece, instead of like Digimon where archetypes are much more specific. So I do want to bring up some problems that Digimon does have. Currently, a lot of our issues are related to the top tier decks outpacing tier 2 and lower decks more and more over time, in addition to some cards that lead to scenarios that just feel bad and are unpleasant to play in. I didn't want to go through this whole thing where I talk about how the competitive scene is healthy and kind of thriving right now without bringing up some genuine problems that the game does have. Again, I love this game. This is my favorite card game, but it does have problems, and I do want to talk about them and acknowledge them because that is how the game gets better, if Bandai listens to the problems that we have with these sorts of things. So, as the game continues to move, certain decks are slowly building up support faster than others, and as such can lead to a large amount of consistency. For this, I'm going to offer up Blue-Green Imperial, which, even though it's a DNA deck, and DNA decks inherently have problems based off of how they play, it has become extremely consistent, even potentially with the ban, or not the ban, the limit that just came through, on Sunday. And then there are certain decks like Red Hybrid that, while not always tier 1, consistently gain support over time and increase the smoothness of their game plan, and because it's an aggro game plan, it can kind of win out of nowhere. And there's also generally one deck a set that is pushed a bit more than everything else, either from random pass support playing well with it, or through its ability to run smaller value engines to shore up their lack of archetype support, and this leaves a lot of room to be desired for casual decks and casual players who just want to play their fun decks. Things like Pulsemon or the position Justimon OTK was in before their new support wave made it slightly more viable, though I'm still going to say it's probably in the same spot. Not being able to play the deck you like at locals because it's filled with competitive players who are consistently ending the game on turn 3 or 4 can feel bad when you don't even get to execute the thing that your deck does, because cards like Trainings and Scrambles, as well as Ukamon, primarily benefit Tier 1 and Tier 1.5 decks significantly more than they do for casual decks. As much as they make casual decks more playable, they will always be better in a deck that has a much more consistent game plan and a faster playstyle. So, it's currently difficult to play decks that you like when certain things no longer get any support, and generics supporting cards for various types of gameplay are few and far between. There aren't also reliable engines for each color yet, as well, to promote gameplay for weaker decks that want to support a boss monster. So, like, we have the dog engine in purple, and we have, the Galaxy engine for blue and green, but they're fairly specific and they don't search, things for everything. Purple is the dog support. It's pretty good in any top end that you can find generically with purple, but Galaxy is, you can argue, more specific, even though their top end blue red support is fairly wide. You don't have things in like green other than stuff that goes into Bloomlord, or you have none for black, you have no generic one for red, or any of the other colors that you're thinking about. Yellow specifically has the vaccine engine, but if you're running non-vaccine yellows, there isn't really anything for you to do. So you can't shore up weaker decks with like more generic engines in this game at the moment. And it kind of leads to, decks that you want to be fun to not really do anything into Tier 1 and Tier 1.5 decks. Sometimes even other Tier 2 decks. In addition to this, the dominance of Floodgate cards like Mirage Galgamon up until the ban this week put many players into feels bad situations that they can't deal with. The primary way for most decks, especially more casual decks, to try and counter Floodgate rookies, as well as cards like Mirage or Hexablau, is via searching the top few cards of their deck with trainings or memory boosts, searcher rookies, or things like Ukamon that are splashable in most strategies. And even if Mirage doesn't have a high win rate in the competitive scene, it is the kind of pub stomper that leads to non-games for decks that have no native way of dealing with it. And Quartzmon is a card like this, and while it hasn't seen like the spotlight in a minute, it also leads to non-games, which can lead to situations that people don't enjoy playing the game. And those sorts of things are bad and unhealthy for the casual format. While Floodgates have their place in a healthy metagame and serve a purpose of slowing down problem decks that top in the competitive scene, creating cards that shut off primary functions of the game can lead to player dissatisfaction. And while I think that they're kind of fun to play, it's not the worst in the competitive scene, but it can be bad for the health of the game as an overall piece. And honestly, I appreciate that they're not really printing like as many of them, though Hexablau I think was also a mistake that they're gonna maybe have to deal with later. But we'll see. It depends on how much people move over to Hexablau now that Mirage is gone. So, things that can be done. Honestly, the solution to the first issue is for Bandai to do more support for older archetypes. It would be nice if there was a separate product that just printed support for old archetypes needing love that don't really need to be a box. Like, EX sets are small sets, but they specifically are promoting new types of cards. And you have the main sets, which are, again, doing new types of cards, but are much bigger and have more different types of things. It'd be nice if they printed something like the LM sets or the, like, reboot set that was specifically for old archetypes, adding in new cards. Or, honestly, they could create more decent pack filler style decks that are cheap to get into the game with and are tier 1.5 or high tier 2. Hunters is the primary example of this working, at it being like $30 to get now for the full deck, or $65 or so at its peak, which should be getting a power boost back up to tier 1.5 in the next main set if you're looking for something cheap and fun to play. and what looks to be the case for Atmon. Atmon is also a toolbox style deck that has a lot of low rarity cards at the moment. I'm not sure how expensive it's going to be, but I kind of predict that it's going to end up in the same spot as Hunters, where it'll be good and people will play it for its toolbox nature for a long period of time. But we'll see. I may be wrong. Who knows? I'd also enjoy if Bandai properly promoted alternate formats like Pauper, where you can only build decks with commons and rares. I know that they're doing that for upcoming tournaments, events, but if they did that kind of thing more frequently or had like separate Ultimate Cup style things for that, or honestly a separate rotation format so that a lot more low powered environment decks could be available to players who enjoy that sort of thing, where Digimon takes more time for everything to resolve. Um, as for the feels bad cards, they just need to print less of them or ban them quickly when they take up a lot of space in the meta. It took a while for the blue dog to get the hit that it deserved, but these things should be watched more carefully for the casual game in addition to the competitive scene, where they're less of an issue for the overall health of the game. They should keep in mind what casual players, need and want out of the format when they're considering bans. As much as you generally want to ban around the competitive scene, sometimes there are things that are unhealthy for the state of the game as a thing that people play and enjoy doing in their off time, and they should potentially look at stuff like that going forward in the future, or do really quick bans like they did with Apocalypse back when that was a problem. Much as I don't agree with them hitting Anubis quite as hard as they did, I think that banning Apocalypse as quickly as they did was very good, and I think that they should do that kind of thing more frequently. But regardless, those are the things that I think that can be done. Honestly, if you have a small community, doing like a Pauper night or things like that would probably be fairly healthy as a way to keep people who are interested in the game but don't constantly want to be doing like sweaty stuff in it, or be able to play their casual decks. There's also little formats where you can't play decks that have topped in past X amount of tournaments, and then you end up with some interesting sorts of things that people get to play older decks that they like. Regardless, I think that's about it. That's it for now. I'm going to do another one of these later. If you like these, I can do more data ones for you, make more, graphs and stuff like that. Do you have any ideas on fixes or things that can be done for the game? If so, leave a comment, or if you're interacting with this on Reddit, because I will be posting it there, leave a comment there. Please like and subscribe and share this with your community or friends who are getting into the competitive scene or getting burnt out on the negativity. This model that I'm using now is by Feral on Twitter and Twitch. My Twitter and Twitch is LainTCG. My original model in some of the older videos is by Be a Big Shot or Alleviated on Twitter. My cursor model is by VeniVidiVT or at VeniVidi_VT. My banner is by YuGiOhs on Twitter, and my logo is by PinkyBird on Twitter and VGen. That's about it. Good luck at your locals, and hope you're enjoying the game. See you later.